West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Well, the breaking news of the night is that the Manhattan District Attorney could soon become the first prosecutor in American history to charge a former president with a crime. The New York Times was the first to break the news, reporting the prosecutors offered Mr. Trump the chance to testify next week before the grand jury that has been hearing evidence in the potential case, the People said. Such offers almost always indicate an indictment is close. It would be unusual for the District Attorney, Alvin Elbrag, to notify a potential defendant without ultimately seeking charges against him. In New York, potential defendants have the right to answer questions in the grand jury before they are indicted, but they rarely testify. The Washington Post is quoting a Trump advisor tonight saying, everyone will advise him not to go in. Of course, no one has to advise Donald Trump not to go in and testify under oath. This is something he lives in fear of. The Manhattan investigation is focused on the $130,000 that was paid to actress Stephanie Clifford, also known as Stormy Daniels, during Donald Trump's first presidential campaign. That was a hush money payment to prevent Stormy Daniels from telling the story about the one evening she spent with Donald Trump in his hotel room 4 months after his current wife gave birth to his last child. The payment worked, temporarily at least, and kept the story quiet until after Donald Trump was elected president. The payment to Stormy Daniels was arranged by Donald Trump's operative Michael Cohen, who was convicted on federal charges in that case. Michael Cohen was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison after admitting under oath, as prosecutors told the court, quote, he acted in coordination with and at the direction of individual one. All of Michael Cohen's crimes in the Stormy Daniels case were committed in coordination with and at the direction of Donald Trump, who was individual one in those federal court filings. It remains a mystery why the same federal prosecutors did not go after Donald Trump for the same crimes after he left office, but it appears the Manhattan District Attorney is now doing that. Michael Cohen told the Washington Post tonight that he has met with the District Attorney 19 times, and tomorrow he will meet with the Manhattan District Attorney for the 20th time. Michael Cohen told the Washington Post that he has not yet been called to testify to the grand jury. So, the Manhattan District Attorney is closing in on Donald Trump. District Attorney Fani Willis in Atlanta, Georgia, is closing in on Donald Trump and has said charges are imminent. We already know that a Georgia grand jury recommended that several people be indicted in the criminal investigation that involves Donald Trump. And Special Prosecutor Jack Smith is investigating Donald Trump for 2 separate sets of possible federal crimes. One involving Donald Trump's possession of government documents after he left office, and the other involving Donald Trump's actions leading up to and on January 6th. So there are 4 separate criminal prosecutions that are closing in on Donald Trump. And you have to ask yourself, what are the odds? What are the odds of Donald Trump escaping charges in all 4 of those criminal investigations? If Donald Trump is going to be criminally charged in any one of those investigations, it is going to be this year. 2023 is going to be the year in history when the first former president of the United States is charged with a crime. It'll be the year for the first time that happens. Or it's going to be the year when Donald Trump finally gets all of his criminal legal problems behind him. And if Donald Trump is charged with a crime, it might actually help House Republicans, because it would take attention away from the way they are humiliating themselves in their own hearings just about every day now. The Republican House of Representatives did not present their budget for the federal government today because they don't have one. Instead, they held clownish hearings in which the Republican members of the committees and their witnesses were humiliated repeatedly by the truth. Republican Trump fanatic Jim Jordan, who has never met a subject he wasn't eager to lie about, held a hearing to find out what was going on at Twitter before Elon Musk bought it.
There's something going on between congressional Republicans and Elon Musk. Mr. Chairman, Americans can see through this. Musk is helping you out politically, and you're going out of your way to promote and protect him and to praise him for his work. This isn't just a matter of what data was given to these so-called journalists before us now. There are many legitimate questions about where Musk got the financing to buy Twitter. We know for a fact that foreign countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and possibly even Russia and China are investors presently in Twitter. Do these countries now have access to private Twitter user data? What agreements has Elon Musk reached with them?
Jim Jordan called Matt Taibbi as a witness. Elon Musk called on Matt Taibbi to analyze a very small selection of electronic communication within Twitter and to then tweet his analysis of that narrowly selected batch of communication that was selected for Matt Taibbi by Elon Musk. Matt Taibbi did not have access and will never have access to most of the electronic communication at Twitter. There are millions of emails and text messages that Matt Taibbi has never seen and will never see.
Elon Musk spoon-fed you his cherry-picked information, which you must have suspected promotes a slanted viewpoint, or at the very least generates another right-wing conspiracy theory. You violated your own standard, and you appear to have benefited from it. Before the release of the emails in August of last year, you had 661,000 Twitter followers. After the Twitter files, your followers doubled, and now it's 3 times what it was last August. I imagine your Substack readership, which is a subscription, increased significantly because of the work that you did for Elon Musk. Now, I'm not asking you to put a dollar figure on it, but it's quite obvious that you've profited from the Twitter files. You hit the jackpot on that Vegas slot machine to which you referred. That's true, isn't it?
I've also reinvested.
You've made some. No. Is it true that you have profited since you were the recipient of the Twitter files? You've made money. Yes or no?
I think it's probably a wash, honestly.
No, you have made money that you did not have before, correct?
But I've also spent money that I didn't have before. I just hired a whole group of people to invest.
Patently obvious answer, reclaiming my time. Attention is a powerful drug. Eyeballs, money, prominence, attention, all of it points to problems with accuracy and credibility. And the larger point, which is social media companies are not biased against conservatives, and if anything, they ignored their own policies by allowing Trump and other MAGA extremists to post incessant lies, endangering public safety and even our democracy. Hypocrisy is the hangover of an addiction to attention.
Hypocrisy is the hangover of an addiction to attention. That hypocrisy was in all of these Republican hearing rooms today. In a hearing of a subcommittee of the House Judiciary Committee, the issue of enforcing possible subpoenas served on the Biden administration was the subject of the day. Jim Jordan was not present at this hearing, but he is the chairman of the full Judiciary Committee, of which this subcommittee is a part.
And I think it's quite rich that we are talking about subpoena compliance under a chairman of the full committee who was absolutely out of subpoena compliance in the last Congress. So we're going to haul witnesses in here today and claim that they did not comply with subpoenas or requests. And that request is so rich because it's coming from a chairman who himself did not comply with the January 6 committee's request. So May 31, you see a letter sent to then Representative Jordan asking that he honor his subpoena. He was asked over and over and over, you were a witness to a crime. You were a witness to the greatest crime ever committed with the most criminals ever indicted in America. Will you help your country? Will you comply with that subpoena? No compliance. Crickets. Absolute defiance of the subpoena. And because of that defiance, the chairman was referred, and it's still pending, to the House Ethics Committee. And why? Well, it's because he took an oath. And I want to have the congressional oath put up there, but the congressional oath mandates that members of Congress defend the Constitution without any mental reservation, or as it says on the slide, purpose of evasion. Not responding to a congressional subpoena is a direct purpose of evasion. So this is our chairman, hauling all us here, everyone here today, people at the Department of Justice, the Department of Education, who are doing important work to claim they are out of compliance when he himself is currently out of compliance.
And in a House Oversight Committee hearing, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez pointed out that Republicans were having a hearing about a word that they could not define. I think you can guess what that word is.
We have about, 7, 8 hearings just in this committee and subcommittee slated this week, and which is a very high number. And I have no I have no qualms with this committee working hard. I have no qualms with this committee doing everything that it can. But I think we need to have a conversation about priorities here. We're having a hearing right now, and it's about that the federal government is too woke. I mean, that's seriously what we're hearing. And then there's no definition of what woke is. But on paper, what's actually being criticized in this hearing is that the so-called woke policies are remote work for federal workers, especially those that live in rural areas, and those who have disabilities, paying interns so that critical opportunities don't just go to privileged kids whose parents can afford to pay for their rent while they go on a free internship. That is what is woke here. That is what the other side is calling woke here.
It is Friday, the 10th of March of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Oh my. Well, we made it to Friday, and we have a weekend ahead of us. What could happen? Oh boy. Remember before Trump when we looked forward to the weekends? And then we thought after Trump that we could look forward to the weekends? Jeez. I guess we haven't gotten rid of Trump, and we still can't look forward to the weekends. Boy, I'll be glad when we can look forward to the weekends. Unfortunately, I fear that when we are finally able to rein in that guy, it's not going to be over. Yep. It's not going to be hunky-dory times. Nope. Can't just stop one guy. We got a whole movement now. So, that's great, isn't it? Hey, didn't you just love DeSantis's PR campaign to kind of walk back his book banning by saying, there's no books being banned in Florida. That's a hoax. And it turns out that his book banning hoax is actually a hoax. One school district banned 50 books and a whole line of one author's books that also included the story of a kid during the Holocaust. And the impetus to remove these 50 books, including the whole line from this one author, came from one parent. That's all it takes. So I love how Ron's out there saying, oh, we didn't make a law to ban books, and yet books are being pulled off the shelves. He goes after teachers who take pictures of empty bookshelves and saying that's a hoax. When it's not a hoax, it's the fact. Okay. And so we have more governors like that, don't we? Mm-hmm. Well, we know that this movement has been going on for many, many, many decades. And now they think they're going to get away with it. Now they think this is the time. Nope. Not going to allow it. Not going to happen. Okay. On another subject, how about that 36-year-old grandma-to-be? And she's like bragging about it. At the same time, telling the rest of us how we're supposed to live our lives. And then you got the other one over there out of Georgia, doing her thing too. Just abject ignorance. Okay, well, that's what they got. That's what they want. They're holding on to a slim majority. And then you got this Santos guy who's now being implicated in some sort of like card reader scam. How much more is this going to... I just don't get it. Al Franken was run out of office for something he did on a comedy tour on the U.S., as a comedian on a USO tour, a decade or more before he even thought about becoming a senator. He got run out of office for that. Faking he was going to grab starlet's breasts. Like that never happened before on a USO tour with Bob Hope. But you got this guy Santos saying, oh, well, you know, he's already elected. He's already in. Nothing we can do. And then these committee hearings. And they're the GOP, of course, in the House, whining about subpoenas this, subpoenas that. And as we know, Jim Jordan himself, right up there as Lawrence specified, still under an order of a subpoena. All right. Well, we know what this is all about. They don't care about governing. They just want power. If there's 1,000 American oligarchs with so much money that they're only taxed at 3%, why is it that those 600 families or 600 individuals, 600 tax entities, why do they get to run everything? That's not democracy. How dare they? And they've captured a party with the help of hostile foreign powers, by the way. Just remember, when you get to a certain economic status in life, you don't have national boundaries that you feel loyal to. In fact, if anything, they're in your way. I don't trust anybody over a certain amount of dollars. You have to prove their trust. Because history and experience shows it's where it's green. Destroy democracy? It's not personal. It's business. We were making money. Saving democracy? That's an economic loser. Well, we'll see. Walgreens stock is down because people don't really like the idea that somebody would tell them, oh, no, you can't have this medicine because we believe in witches. And witches are scary. And science is like witchcraft. We don't understand it. So it's witchcraft. And we got to keep it from indoctrinating our kids. Yeah, as if ignorance isn't an indoctrination in and of itself. Why am I going off? Well, it's Friday. It is. It's Friday. We do have a bit of a news read for you, so I suppose I could let you know what we have in store for you for the rest of the show here. As we begin in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, well, House Republicans opened a new attack on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They are never going to stop. Consumers having protection. We have 600 to 1,000 oligarchs. They are much more important than the rest of us. Never forget that. A backlash by powerful national business groups is pushing conservative Republicans to weaken their anti-ESG proposals. Yeah, there's something that what's up with equity and being equitable and being equal. There's something they don't want that to be part of a business plan, and yet business groups say, you know what, this is good business. Interesting. And the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration regulators are turning up the heat on Tesla. Yeah, they have steering wheels that just fall off. How nice is that? After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Egypt's inflation has spiked again, hiking prices of basic food items. And Georgia's governing party is withdrawing a foreign agents law that opponents warned would usher in Russian-style repression. I know it sounds like the state of Georgia, but this is about the country of Georgia. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Page at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page to the left from that chat room link near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. And thank you for those of you who have recently become recurring Patreons of Netroots Radio. Your recurring patronage is helping us pay our bills and all the other costs that it takes to run this powerhouse of resistance. So thank you for your generosity, and thank you to those of you who have been so generous over all these many years. Thank you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable at Justice Putnam. Fancy that. I post the show notes and links diary 10 minutes before showtime on Daily Co's. And as you know, that's where you can find the actual articles in which we draw inspiration from. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. All right, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays is Out of the American Independent by Josh Israel. House Republicans are pushing a flurry of bills aimed at undermining the operations of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Why would they do that? Now, of course, we know that's the independent agency designed to protect consumers from unfair treatment by big banks and financial institutions. Like those payday check lenders that charge you about 800,000 million percent, after 2 days. Well, yesterday, Thursday, the House Financial Services Committee Subcommittee on Financial Institutions and Monetary Policy held a hearing titled Consumer Financial Protection Bureau Ripe for Reform. It focused on 9 bills, all introduced by Republicans, that would change the structure of the Bureau, make its funding optional, and reduce its power to regulate the industry. In a memorandum dated March 6, the panel's Republican majority staff said the hearing would, quote, examine the leadership structure, funding, budget, and operations of the CFPB in areas in which reforms are needed. Are they? Subcommittee Chair Andy Barr accused the agency of using tactics of regulation without rules and said in his opening statement, the CFPB does not have an executive board, an independent inspector general, or any true oversight of the director. This is unlike virtually every other federal agency. It's led by a single partisan director, Mr. Rohit Chopra, who was routinely acted unilaterally and arbitrarily, often outside any statutory mandate, without engaging in rulemaking or compliance with the Administrative Procedures Act, and even sometimes without adjudication. This has led the CFPB becoming the most unchecked, unaccountable agency in the entire federal government. Wow, what about the military? Anyway, in his own opening statement, Illinois Representative Bill Foster, the ranking Democratic member of the subcommittee, said, if past is prologue, I am afraid that I may hear from my Republican colleagues not ways in which we can improve the CFPB, but ways in which we can weaken or handicap it. Many in the Republican Party have fought against the CFPB since its inception. He noted that the funding mechanism used for the CFPB is the same one used for the FDIC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, and the Federal Reserve, and that those agencies will be equally threatened if CFPB's funding is ultimately found invalid. Wow, that is a gambit, isn't it? Republicans have effectively launched an attack that could imperil much of the financial regulatory infrastructure that has saved the U.S. economy in 2008 and again in 2020. Roughly 80% of polled citizens support the CFPB and want the agency to continue its job, Foster said. In 2010, the Democratic-controlled House and Senate passed the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, a package of reforms designed to better regulate the financial sector and to prevent another economic meltdown like the one that shook the global economy in 2008 and 2009. One of the law's provisions created the independent CFPB to protect consumers and is funded by the Federal Reserve System rather than by Congress. The CFPB's website states, we aim to make consumer financial markets work for consumers, responsible providers, and the economy as a whole. We protect consumers from unfair, deceptive, or abusive practices and take action against companies that break the law. We arm people with the information, steps, and tools that they need to make smart financial decisions. Well, Republican lawmakers nearly universally opposed both Dodd-Frank and the CFPB. For more than a decade, they have attempted to eliminate or gut it. Their efforts thus far have failed, allowing the agency to win more than $16 billion in relief for consumers and collecting $3.7 billion in civil penalties through enforcement actions. No wonder the Republican Crime Party wants the CFPB to fail. Indiana of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Conservative Republicans who want to thwart socially and environmentally conscious investing are now being pushed to water down their proposals after backlash from powerful business groups and fears that state pension systems could see huge losses. In both Kansas and Indiana, where the GOP has legislative supermajorities, bankers associations and state chambers of commerce criticize the strongest versions of anti-ESG legislation that are currently under consideration as anti-free market. In Kansas, their opposition prompted a Senate committee's chair to drop the toughest version of its bill, applying anti-ESG rules to firms handling private investments before hearings began this week. He also counseled a discussion today of a milder version of an anti-ESG bill after the head of the state pension system for teachers and government workers warned that it could see $3.6 billion in losses over 10 years if the bill were passed. And last month, legislative researchers in Indiana reported that its pension system expected the first version of a House bill to cost the system $6.7 billion over 10 years, prompting lawmakers to rewrite it before the chamber passed it. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance, and those factors increased use in investing in recent years. It had inspired GOP attempts to thwart it. Now those efforts are riling groups long allied with Republicans in backing less government regulation. This is the underlying political nature of this, said Brian McGannon, acting CEO and managing director of U.S. SIF, the Forum for Responsibility and Sustainable Investment. They really aren't thinking about the consequences of the kind of real-world impacts of what this means in the financial system. About 1/8 of U.S. assets being professionally managed, or $8.4 trillion, are being managed in line with ESG principles, according to a report in December from U.S. SIF, which promotes sustainable investing. At least 7 states, including Oklahoma, Texas, and West Virginia, have enacted anti-ESG laws in the past 2 years. GOP governors DeSantis of Florida and Gianforte of Montana also have moved to ensure their state funds aren't invested using ESG principles. Critics of ESG contend that using investments to move the U.S. away from fossil fuels, address gun violence, or protect abortion rights sacrifices earnings for investors and undercuts the finances of public pensions. Anti-ESG efforts also draw support from companies and industries that feel under attack, such as oil and natural gas. During an Indiana House Committee hearing last month, lawmakers heard a litany of complaints from businesses, including those in coal mining and firearms production, about difficulties they blame on corporate ESG policies. This is, again, a social agenda, chasing something that shouldn't be chasing. Kansas Senate Committee Chair Mike Thompson, a Kansas City area Republican, who labels ESG investments as potentially dangerous. Supporters say ESG isn't about boycotting certain industries or companies, but of doing a better job assessing future risks, such as costs from major accidents or pollution or diminishing local water supply. They argue that considering such factors as part of an investment manager's obligation to get the best returns possible. It's just the latest moral panic that's been invented to get the conservatives riled up, said Kansas City area state rep Ru Zhu, the top Democrat on the Kansas House Committee dealing with the issue. In Kansas, the Bankers and Credit Union Association and the State Chamber of Commerce went from opposing the tougher version of the anti-ESG legislation, to being neutral on all or most of its milder version. In Indiana, the state chamber endorsed the more limited version. Kreischer and Michelle Chapman of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. U.S. safety regulators are turning up the heat on Tesla, announcing investigations into steering wheels coming off some SUVs and a fatal crash involving a Tesla suspected of using an automated driving system when it ran into a parked fire truck in California. That happens a lot, you know. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration said it is launching a special crash investigation team to probe the February 18 crash involving a Tesla Model S and a ladder truck from the Contra Costa County Fire Department. The fire truck probe is part of a larger investigation by the agency into multiple instances of Tesla using the automaker's autopilot system, crashing into parked emergency vehicles that are tending to other crashes. And HTSA has become more aggressive in pursuing safety problems with Teslas in the past year, announcing multiple recalls and investigations. The driver of the 2014 Tesla Model S was killed in the crash, and a passenger critically injured. 4 firefighters were treated for minor injuries, and the $1.4 million ladder truck was damaged. And HTSA is investigating how the autopilot system detects and responds to emergency vehicles parked on highways. At least 14 Teslas have crashed into emergency vehicles nationwide while using the system. Well, that brings us to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Big and High. The last time you saw a bear full of coke, it was probably a teddy stuffed with it on a bad 70s TV cop show. But in fact, in the 1980s, a real bear in the Georgia mountains fatally ingested a large quantity of coke, which had been tossed out of an airplane by a smuggler. Later, the creature was stuffed and ultimately purchased by country music icon Waylon Jennings. So there's a movie in there somewhere, right? You betcha, especially if the little black bear is now an enraged 700-pound grizzly, bungling drug dealers are combing the wilderness for their goods, and hapless forest rangers and local residents are stumbling into the action. From director Elizabeth Banks, we get Cocaine Bear, which was a meme before opening in its first theater, and which lives up to the hype. It's gory, think numerous creature features, or maybe Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey, but with lots of humor. from one-liners to silly gags and sequences, like one especially uproarious and well-choreographed one with the bear chasing an ambulance. A movie like this promises humor after the fact, too, if you read reviews. Even after disclaimers about the occasional cool popcorn movie, some reviewers are still evaluating the efficacy of the subplots and snootily discounting it all because, hey, someone could have just shot the bear, right? The era, the 1980s, and the terrain, Georgia, bring to mind the absurdist TV hoot from back in the day, Dukes of Hazzard, and that's still bringing in royalties 40 years on. It's probably best here just to relax and enjoy Isaiah Whitlock, O'Shea Jackson, Margot Martindale, Ray Liotta in his last role, and others just dealing with the cocaine bear. The World Series issues will still be available for overthinking after you leave the theater. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at Take2MovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's Science Quickly. I'm Karen Hopkin. If you're a new parent, or have ever had any exposure to a baby, you're no doubt familiar with this sound. Now, the emotions you might experience when treated to this exhibition of infant lung capacity may vary, depending on the time of day, how much sleep you've had, if any, and how long the show has been going on. But one thing's for sure. Anyone who has ever heard a baby crying has wondered, how do I make it stop? Well, a new study shows that 5 minutes of motion is all it takes to get a crying baby to finally conk out. The work appears in the journal Current Biology.
Infant crying is a big issue for parents, but what parents can do is limited.
Kumi Kuroda is a lab head at the Riken Center for Brain Science in Japan, and a mother of 4. She and her colleague, Gianluca Esposito, of the University of Trento in Italy, know all the tricks.
Some parents put their baby in the stroller and walk around.
Some strap them into battery-powered swings or rockers. Others swear by a late-night drive around the neighborhood. But there is one method that's more or less universal.
Around the world, parents know that crying babies usually calm down when they are picked up and carried.
And it doesn't just work for human babies.
The phenomenon, the transport response, is widely seen in mammals, such as mice, rats, lions, and in monkeys.
When toted by their moms, these baby animals quit their fidgeting and keep distress calls to a minimum. It's a response that's especially strong in species in which the young are physically immature and unable to care for themselves. Now, when a mama mouse picks up and runs off with a pup, it's generally not so she can get some shut-eye.
It is often an emergency that forces animal parents to carry their infants.
To, say, avoid an encroaching predator.
So the infants innately cooperate with the parents by withholding their cries and movements during carrying.
Because their lives literally depend on it. Now, to test the transport response in humans, Kuroda and her colleagues had 21 moms try 4 different approaches to getting their fussy babies to hush. They held the babies while walking or just sitting. They pushed them in a stroller or placed them in a crib or on a couch for just 5 minutes.
And we found that all the infants stopped crying, and more than half of them fell asleep during or soon after the 5 minutes of carrying, even in the daytime.
That's a time when they wouldn't normally be trying to nap. Laying the babies down or sitting with them did nothing. But in the stroller, which seemed to work as well as the carry and walk approach, the babies relaxed, their heart rate slowed, and they dropped off to sleep. Then came the tricky part.
When the mothers tried to put their sleepy babies to bed, more than 1/3 of the infants became alert again.
It turns out that detaching from mom triggers a physiological response that can wake a baby right up again. That's because
sleep is shallow in the initial phase.
In that early stage of sleep, which lasts about 8 minutes in babies that are 4 to 5 months old, a gentle touch or a quietly closing door is enough to raise their heart rate and remind them that they were vocally objecting to their current condition just a minute or 2 ago. The solution?
Waiting 5 to 8 minutes after sleep onset stabilizes the sleep state.
So Croda says you should sit with your snoozing offspring for an extra 8 minutes before attempting to lay them down.
This method of 5-minute walking and 5 to 8 minute sitting is safe, cost-free, and effective. So I think it's worth trying before worrying about the infant crying or what's wrong with the baby or getting frustrated and stressed out.
If it works for a lioness, it should work for a tiger mom or any exhausted parent hoping for just a few minutes peace. For Scientific Americans, Science Quickly, I'm Karen Hopkins.
Victor deployed for the first time to Afghanistan in 2003. At 4 a.m, my phone rang. They said, "I regret to inform you that your husband was wounded in action." Victor sustained a moderate traumatic brain injury. I was doing school full-time, and I was also then caring for Victor. One of the most important elements of caregiving is taking care of yourself. I just didn't want to forget that I also had goals and that I also had a life. What I did is I challenged Victor to meet me halfway. There are almost 6 million military and veteran caregivers across the nation. We have our own journey, and we can fulfill that journey at the same time that we are helping our loved one.
Visit aarp.org/caregiving for a free military veterans guide to navigate your caregiving journey and better care for your loved one and yourself. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
When Judy Heumann arrived at kindergarten, the principal wouldn't let her in.
I'm Lily Ledbetter, and this is a Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
And years later, although qualified as a teacher, they wouldn't let her teach either. For the same reason, Judy Heumann's mobility depended on a wheelchair. In 1970, having attained all the necessary degrees and requirements, she was denied a job as a teacher in New York City because the school system said teachers had to be able to accompany students out of the building quickly in case of an emergency. And Judy Heumann said she moved faster in a wheelchair than most pedestrians. There was a big public fight, and eventually the school system relented, and Judy Heumann became New York City's first teacher in a wheelchair. And her fight for civil rights had just begun. She led the fight in the 1970s for Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which outlawed discrimination against disabled persons by any institution receiving federal money. She fought both for the passage of the law and its implementation, and then fought successfully for the 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act, which broadened the protections of Section 504 to the private sector and to other areas of public life. Judy Heumann changed many, many lives, everyone's life, for the better. We mourn her passing in early March at the age of 75.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1968. That was the day that farm labor activist Cesar Chavez broke a 25-day fast. He fasted as a sign of commitment to nonviolence during the struggle for farm workers in Delano, California, to gain fair wages and safe working conditions. During the fast, he only drank water. He broke the fast with a ceremonial mass in Delano. Presidential candidate Robert Kennedy was in attendance. At the mass, Chavez was too weak to give a speech, so he gave his written words to Reverend James Drake to share with those in attendance. He wrote, "We are gathered here today not so much to observe the end of the fast, but because we are a family bound together in common struggle for justice. We are a union family celebrating our unity and the non-violent nature of our movement. The fast has had different meanings for different people. Some of you may still wonder about its meaning and importance. It was not intended as a pressure against any growers. For that reason, we have suspended negotiations and arbitration proceedings and relaxed the militant picketing and boycotting of the strike during this period. I undertook the fast because my heart was filled with grief and pain for the suffering of the farm workers. The fast was first for me and then for all of us in this union. It was a fast for nonviolence and a call for sacrifice. Chavez engaged in 2 more long fasts during his life as an activist. He fasted in 1972 for 24 days. And in 1988, at the age of 61, he fasted for 36 days to highlight the harmful effects of pesticides on farm workers and their children. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 35 degrees Fahrenheit. We are under a active wind advisory, and I'll fill you in on that in a bit. Currently, rain showers are mixing with snow, and that'll be tapering off this morning with mostly cloudy in the afternoon and continuing rain. And we'll reach a high today in the mid-40s, then partly cloudy overnight. Lows in the upper 20s, low 30s, winds light and variable. Our winds today are out of the west-southwest at 10 to 15 miles per hour with swirling gusts. So we'll look forward to that. Then a few clouds early tomorrow, otherwise generally sunny with highs around 55 and winds light and variable. And then rain returning and lasting throughout the week starting tomorrow night. Looks like pollen is still rated as none outside the window here in Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is good at 37 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is in the moderate range and has ticked back down to level 3. Barometric pressure is rising at 29.62 inches. Visibility is at 7 miles, and relative humidity is at 88%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 42 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 43 degrees with the rain showers and a flood advisory. Rome is 62 degrees and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 41 and fair. Kabul is 52 and fair. Hong Kong is 70 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 56 degrees and clear. Sydney, Australia is 70 and clear. San Francisco, California is 48 and cloudy, and New York, New York is 42 degrees Fahrenheit and mostly cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. up at the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Inflation in Egypt again hit a new high for this year in February. With prices rising most steeply for food, the country is in the midst of an economic crisis and a currency depreciation. Annual inflation rose to 32.9% in February, and that was from the government stats agency, up from 26.5% in January. Grains, meat, poultry, fish, and fruit were among the products with the biggest price spikes. The statement added that food prices have increased 61.5% since the same time last year. Egyptians, nearly a third of whom live in poverty according to official figures, have been striving to keep up with increasing prices since last year after Russia's invasion of Ukraine sparked worldwide inflation. The country is the world's largest wheat importer, with most of its imports having traditionally come from Eastern Europe. The war in Ukraine came after years of government austerity in Egypt, the coronavirus pandemic, and more than a decade of disruptions to the Mideast nation's economy. In 2016, Egyptian President El-Sisi's government launched a reform program aimed at reversing long-standing distortions in the economy in return for loans from the IMF. To try to curb the economic turmoil, Egypt secured the latest financial help, a $3 billion bailout loan from the IMF last December. In return, El-Sisi's government committed to various IMF-guided economic reforms, including a free floating exchange rate for the Egyptian pound and a reduction in fuel subsidies.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Sofiko Megrelezi and Dasha Litvinova of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Georgia's governing party said it would withdraw draft legislation that opponents and tens of thousands of protesters who swarmed the Capitol warned could stifle dissent and curtail media freedoms, ushering in Russian-style repression. The bill would have required media and non-governmental organizations that receive more than 20% of their funding from foreign sources to register as agents of foreign influence. Its opponents argued the bill was inspired by a similar law in Russia that was used to silence critics and could hinder Georgia's aspirations of one day joining NATO and the EU. Protests against the bill began last week in the capital, Tbilisi, but swelled in recent days and were met with tear gas and water cannons. The Interior Ministry said 133 demonstrators were arrested, although Georgian police late announced they had released all who faced administrative charges and not criminal prosecution, without specifying how many. Citing the controversy in society the proposed law triggered, the governing Georgia Dream Party and its allies said they would withdraw it, but that process might be complicated. Since the bill already passed its first of 3 required readings, protests resumed last night, with tens of thousands demonstrating to ensure the bill is actually abandoned, as well as the release of those arrested. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night and all weekend for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here on Monday, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.